So, as a general rule, I'm not particularly a fan of what might be considered high fantasy, in which magic has taken the role of science, basically, in a world that understands all its nuances and all of its components. I find it somewhat cheap to include magic and not have it be magical in some way. I prefer my magic and my magical settings to be mysterious and not fully understood, in the vein of Tolkien and Martin and Bernard Cornwell, a historical fantasy or a historical fiction author who happens to include a great deal of magic in his stories. Um, in the writing of Michael Moorcock, we see a sort of middle ground in which high magic is coupled with a sort of mystery that I liked, really. I liked the idea of it, at least, though I think it. I still would have preferred less dragons and teleportals and vision quests that leave you, like, basically immortal and invulnerable. Um, so I read some of Michael Moorcock's Elric stories, detailing the adventures of his most famous character, Elric, as it happens, of Melniboné, who's this sickly, romanticized albino with white hair and red eyes, and the rightful heir to this great empire. He is a sorcerer of phenomenal power, though his body is racked with sickness, and he can barely survive without these potions and drugs that afford him the ability to breathe and think and and fight or do anything, really. Um, he's clever, I'll say, though he has a certain way of going about things that doesn't sit well with me a lot of the time, um, which is probably the point. Elric is by far a complex character, not exactly meant to be sympathetic all the time. I don't think. In fact, he might be closer to a villain, an evil character who happens to be better than those around him, a la the orc Grimnir, Jack Skellington, or Princess Bubblegum. In any case, I read this Elric of Melniboné, uh, Part 1, the Elric Saga, Part 1, actually. It's a gift, was a gift, I think, and tells our man's story in what I assume to be a mostly chronological order, which might have actually been uh, a mistake on my part. It might have hampered my enjoyment somewhat. Uh, because now that I've done more research on it, I understand that the stories weren't actually written in chronological order, uh, and Elric doesn't really resemble someone like Conan or Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, who you can kind of pick up and read at any point in their life. I think Elric sort of exists in this state where you need the premise first, then you read the stuff that happened beforehand. Uh, because about halfway through this book, Elric claims the black sword Stormbringer, which becomes his signature weapon, right? And kind of a crucial part of his character. Elric is defined in many ways by his sword, and I wonder if I'd be singing higher praise if I read stories about him doing cool stuff with the magic sword first, and then got the backstory, because it's a great concept for a magical item and a great tool to explore certain aspects of the character. Elric is sickly and vulnerable, but when he makes use of Stormbringer, he becomes superhuman with strength and speed to best almost anyone in a fight. Uh, and Stormbringer drains the life force of its victims, trapping their souls and adding their strength to its own, which makes Elric even more powerful. But the thing is, Stormbringer is evil, and it corrupts its user, spurring him on to greater and greater and more terrible acts of violence. Elric knows this. He tries not to use Stormbringer too often, but he suffers from this desire for victory and for this desire to sort of get one over on his enemies, right? I suspect he's tired of being seen as weak, both physically and mentally. Because at first, when he first starts out, Elric is very concerned with doing good, with trying to be a good and moral king, uh, which doesn't go over well with the very self-centered and decadent elvish court of Melniboné. They ridiculed him for this perceived weakness, and even his own cousin eventually rebels against him for based solely on his physical weakness and on his morality. Right. Uh, in turn, we see Elric snap on multiple occasions, ordering these horrific executions and wielding Stormbringer with such anger that he winds up hurting people. The sword is drawn to misery and bloodshed, and it will actively divert its course to kill people uh, who you don't even intend to do any harm to. Elric sometimes has to overpower the sword to keep it from killing people, and even then, I'm not sure I agree with some of the decisions Elric makes on who to spare and who to kill. Because he spares his cousin Yirkun, who proves time and time again that he is a raging evildoer who will not be imprisoned or cowed or ever relent. Yirkun does some horrible things that range from full-blown war crimes to assault to uh, things get a little bit Lannistery over on Melniboné. It's a whole mess. But Yirkun needed to die, is the thing. But Elric doesn't kill him. He lets Yirkun live, and I believe he will rue the day. He did that. Yeah. Not wanting to spoil too much from what I know, right? Uh, I always, even before reading this, I knew the basic story of Elric, and even after, right, I sort of picked up on everything else, right? Elric has a hard time of it. He really does. But as with my time reading Fritz Leiber and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, I was almost right away interested in the world, particularly in the cosmology the incredibly clever Michael Moorcock has created. The world around Elric is so twisted and strange and follows this dualistic philosophy of order and chaos. Order is represented as sort of angelic, though not always, and chaos is sort of represented as demonic, though again not always. The people of Melniboné happen to have a much closer relationship to chaos, drawing upon these elemental and primordial forces to aid them in their times of need. When a sorcerer needs to go outside in Moorcock's world, he summons the elementals and gets them to make a nice blue sky for him, basically, is the impression I got. In any case, I was I was immediately struck by the eerie, somewhat morally ambiguous creature known as Arioch, who is a lord of chaos and a duke of hell, which sounds a little like a contradiction. Um, that is probably the point. I figured you couldn't be a duke if you were the embodiment of chaos and disorder. But what do I know about medieval hierarchies? All I did was binge read A Song of Ice and Fire till my eyes fell out. I even had to pay a woods witch to have them reattached, but that's a different story. Arioch is a great villain, I'll have you know, and this amazing agent of chaos who's always offering to make a deal in exchange for a little more mayhem in the world. He's this crafty cherubic, uh, I'm such a nice guy sort of character, sort of, and he's looking to turn Elric into his puppet. He's a great character, great villain, very inspiring. Now, I'm not going to go into too much stuff about the Eternal Champion or the whole temporal multiple lives shenanigans that Moorcock likes to play with, because it's not really my cup of tea. I mean, an argument could be made that the Elric universe as a whole is not really my cup of tea. As a general rule, I do like, as I said, I like my magic lower and dirtier than what seems to be the norm for Elric and his buddies. Which is not to say I hated the experience, not at all. I think Moorcock was able to keep me interested as long as he did was a sign of his skill as a writer. And the fact that I was able to recognize a good character, despite my personal misgivings, is also a testament to his skill. I enjoyed Moorcock's writing, and I liked the ideas that were introduced with Elric and the mad, sad little universe that he exists in. And I'm glad that Elric himself, the brooding, white-haired, uh, spell-casting swordsman, uh, who is referred to as the White Wolf, mind you, most likely inspired the brooding, white-haired, spell-casting swordsman Geralt of Rivia, the Witcher, who is also referred to as the White Wolf. And who doesn't love Geralt of Rivia? Anyway, if you're anything like me and prefer low magic, less aliens and demons and living stone towers, I'm not sure you're going to love Elric. But I know you're going to love Michael Moorcock's stories if you appreciate good writing, this very thoughtful science fiction meets fantasy approach with weird aliens and demons and living stone towers, right? And you might like it no matter the case, sort of like I did. I do think I preferred Robert E. Howard's stories and Fritz Leiber's characters, but still, it's far from bad, and I'm I'm still glad I read it. Moorcock sort of is one of the cornerstones of the sword and sorcery genre, uh, and I'm glad I had the willingness to give it a shot. Yeah. Bye.